All right. Hey, everyone. I'm going to do a quick intro and then hand it over. So this is Dhaval. Dhaval is the founder of Evolve Agility, a principles to practices coaching and training consultancy. He's a frequent speaker at global Agile conferences and has 17 plus years of Agile implementation, coaching, organization transformation experience. He is a Scrum Alliance certified enterprise coach, certified Scrum trainer, and certified Agile leadership educator. You ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Kayla. Welcome. Here in this particular talk, I'm here to talk about how to think in systems. And my intent here is to start with a sense of intuition around what the systems are, and then we'll work on some basic building blocks about how systems come about, and then we'll look at a way of understanding how we can learn more about our own organizations, the way they currently are, the way it currently is, and then what can you do to influence a shift at an organizational level towards a better place. That better place depends on your organizational values, your pursuits as a company, about what you want to do for your customers and for the employees that work in the organization. So we're going to take a slow build-up approach. What I would like you to do is to take about 30 seconds, and if you have a pen and a paper, write down a question. That is a question about your organization that you currently have. I am not going to receive those questions yet. I will ask for a question at the end, but let's start with the question about what are you curious about your organization, or what do you want to understand about your own organization? I'll give you a moment and a half, and then we'll start. I hope that was just enough time for you to pop up a question and write it in your notepad. We'll receive those questions at the end of the talk. A bit of a logistics, if you're interested about who we are as Evolve Agility, what we do, and you want to receive a copy of the slides as a PDF, then I'll be happy to send it across to you. The QR code will allow you to sign up. During the talk, you will see the QR code at sections. So if you want to wait out until you find if the talk is interesting to then sign up, there will be multiple opportunities for you to do that. All beginnings have a beginning. The first thing that I want to be clear about is what is a system and how can you contrast it to something else. You can contrast a system to a collection. A collection is primarily a jar of beans. It's a set of things that are put together, and if you remove one bean, it doesn't change the fact that it is still a jar of beans. But when you connect these parts in a specific order, in this particular picture, you're looking at the parts of a motorcycle. When it is put together in a certain manner, it serves a function, it provides a purpose. And that is what a system is, as opposed to a collection of things that are put together. You probably also know that we have internal systems. We have I shouldn't do that. We have our respiratory system. There is a circulatory system. Humor me for a second. Close your eyes. All right, open it up. Now stop your heartbeat. You're seeing how there are some parts of our being that are voluntary systems. I can choose not to look, but I cannot choose not to breathe. I cannot choose not to have my heart beat. These subsystems, they are in service of a much bigger system, and they cease to exist if the larger whole ceases to exist. So one way to understand what systems are from an intuitive sense is a system is a collection of multiple subsystems, but a subsystem does not exist independent of the larger system. And if you look at it from that standpoint in our organizations, you will find your organization as a whole is a system, and you have subsystems like how do we recruit, How do we decide what products to build? How do we kind of do our HR functions? Now, these subsystems are part of a much larger ecosystem. In other words, if you look at what is going on, you as a family, you have a system going on inside your house. You have a wife, at least for me, I have a wife, I have two kids, and we are a system. Then we participate in a much bigger system called our neighborhood that participates even in a much bigger system, the state of Texas. When I participate in a public transport system, I have to follow the rules or regulations of how to act or behave when I'm part of that particular system. In other words, systems are all around us. They are within us, they are outside us. And this is perhaps one of the biggest insights of thinking in systems, is once you can learn how to think in systems, you can transcend the traditional boundaries of what you consider a entity. In other words, it gives you a useful technique to look beyond the surface level implementation of something and to say, oh, the financial system is fairly close to the respiratory system. If we don't have cash flow in our business, similar to how in a human body, if you don't have circulation of oxygen through your body, it's going to be a difficult situation. The same thing applies for our organization. So it lends you the ability to think through analogies, which is one of the most powerful techniques that humans have for learning. Is if we can draw a comparison to something that we understand, then I am much better suited or able to understand something else, which is different from my perception. And that's the core strength of a systems thinking approach or thinking in systems. One of the key tenets about thinking in systems is in a Newtonian world where there is a very clear cause and effect, in the real world, the cause and effect are interlinked in a variety of ways. In other words, what cause leads to an effect is not necessarily a singular cause, but a collection of different causes influencing the outcome that comes from your organization, from your particular system. And these effects in turn create multiple effects, which also influence the cause. In other words, what you will find in complexity is when a interaction occurs, it gives rise to a effect that is an emergent property of that interaction that is happening at one level. And that emergent property starts to influence how the agents are going to respond. Think of it this way. The song that you listen to when you're driving from home to your workplace or somewhere else has no impact on the traffic. You could be listening to Metallica or you could be listening to Taylor Swift. It doesn't impact the flow of traffic. But if there was an emergency announcement made by the radio, it will have a tremendous impact on the traffic. In other words, there are multiple causes for what you see as a behavior. That is a core tenet around systems. And these causes also result in an effect that will in turn impact what happens at the local or the individual level. This is a snapshot. I have not tested it for accuracy. But it is an important thing to consider. A thing to consider is perhaps a show of hands for folks who close their door for their house before you go to sleep. Almost everyone, right? Because inherent in there is a value system that there is a sense of personal property that the state is expected to protect. That sense of personal property did not exist for civilizations 100, 2,000 years ago. Not to say that it never existed before, but many systems have come in the sense of having a communal sense where you have a big tent and everybody comes inside the tent, versus today where we value the sense of private property that we do in the society that we live in. In other words, what I'm trying to tell you is systems come and go. And these systems are based on the values of the people who contribute to building that system. And the values dictate what individuals value. in their interactions with each other. And systems, in this sense, come, they grow, and then eventually they collapse to give rise to a new set of values system where the agents interacting in that system value something else, and then a new system emerges. We're going to look at a few building blocks and then get into more practical terms. The first building block is feedback. Don't touch that hot plate is something that almost every parent has told their child with a predictable response of trying to touch the hot plate. And when you touch the hot plate, you get an immediate reflex because the body is telling you this is hot, you're going to get injured. So when you talk about feedback, you also have to talk about feedback in the sense of what is your response time. You'll also find that in organizations, some management cultures primarily operate on a reflex basis. In other words, no matter what happens, we jump to conclusion, make a decision, and move on. As opposed to taking in that feedback, processing that information, or allowing time to give some meaning behind what this feedback is, and then choosing a response, or taking time to then reply. One of the first things that feedback tests is what is your sensitivity to that thing. In other words, if you have no sensitivity to a particular aspect of the environment, then you will not receive that feedback, and as a consequence, you will not respond to it. The second aspect about systems is reinforcing dynamic. Most of us understand this as compound interest. If you take a loan and there is a compound interest, you know the interest is going to bubble up if you don't pay the principal over the time. It is also described as the snowball effect. Frank Zappa called it the yellow snowball effect, but that's where the Huskies go. But the bottom line is, as you get more because you got more. That is another dynamic that leads to either virtuous or vicious cycles. In other words, whenever you experience a growth or a collapse, it is primarily because of some dynamic in that larger system about reinforcing a thing over and over again where it compounds. Because it is bigger, it gets even bigger. The third dynamic that you will find in systems is a balancing dynamic. This is similar to seesaw. I think, do you all know that term, seesaw? Yeah, as kids you play, right? Where if your friend is on the heavier side, you have to try to get down or ask for help from a friend because you're trying to balance the gravity of how much it supports my friend and not me, you see? So I have to get another friend to help me out with it. The balancing effect is often experienced when your organization or as an individual or as a team, you are pursuing a goal, something that is a target. It may not be numerically expressed, but whenever you have a goal, you are going to experience some kind of balancing effect. A more common goal after the New Year's is I need to get more healthy. And what that means could be different things for different people. And in pursuit of that goal, some folks will say, you know, I'm going to watch out for how many calories I consume, or I'm going to watch out for how many days I go to the gym. And when it goes off, in other words, I go to a week and don't go to the gym, I'm now trying to balance myself by saying, I'm going to go next week, add a reminder so I know I need to go. You see? So when you look at goals, you should also expect that this goal will only be achieved if there is a complementary balance in the larger organization towards that goal. Because if that balance doesn't exist, the system will continue to veer off course. Yeah, that's how we kind of look into reinforcing loops or balancing loops. Lastly, there's this notion of leverage. Archimedes was famous for saying that if you give me a lever long enough and a place to put it, I can move the world. Well, literally, yes, physics will allow you to do that. But what he meant was around, if you give me an access point to question or challenge your thinking, I can move your world, which is the world that you live in inside your head. So think about leverage points as key areas in a system. This could be for an individual, it could be for an organization, where a small change is going to have a disproportionately large impact on the overall system. Are you with me so far? Yeah, some of the basic building blocks. If you use a scissor or if you try to pry open a jar, you are primarily applying leverage, because the other option is to break the jar, and that will be a more difficult challenge to sort through all the glass pieces. You see? Thinking in systems also is often described as considering it as an iceberg. The surface level are the events. If you read news, primarily you receive events. And these events are generated because of some behavior of a subsystem or a behavior of an agent inside this system. What you don't get to see is the structure of this system that generates this behavior and the behavior that generates this event. What I mean by that is inherently the structure of any system will always be hidden. There is no way you can understand the depths of a single individual. In fact, it is a pursuit for a lot of meditation practitioners to understand themselves. And no matter how long they practice, there is always something new to be discovered or uncovered by the individual themselves. What you can do, though, is you can look at the evidence a system leaves behind. And that evidence, when you track, will give you some insights about the underlying structure, but at no point will you be able to understand the whole history of your organization, the whole history of the team, the whole history of you and why you have the preferences or the biases or the values that you have. But you can look back in time and say, you know, don't go to gym, don't go to gym, don't go to gym, don't go to gym. That's the evidence. So perhaps I need to reevaluate my goals, or I need to do something different because my inherent structure, what I mean by that structure here is my mental model of how to get healthy is probably not working. So I need to rethink or reevaluate how I approach this situation. One of the key elements of systems thinking is to allow time to reveal the larger system at play. A caution. It is very likely that as someone who is observing a system from outside in, you could look at a series of events and build a false narrative around these events. For example, in an organization, it could be person A stood up in the all hands meeting. 2 weeks later, they were let go. So I can build a conclusion that our company fires people who speak up in all hands meeting. You see, until you start to go beyond the surface to then have a conversation with the people who are involved in it, and you might uncover that the motivation or the reason could be totally different than what was actually observed by the participants. But these false narratives, they become stories, and they become clickbaits, and they drive a lot of energy. I mean, that's what the newspapers actually do. You know, they look at a series of events and quickly connect it with a nice story and say, Kim Kardashian said so, done. You know, so look beyond the surface level events is the key message over here. Let's look at this particular structure or this particular way of thinking in systems of events, behaviors, and structure with an example. When there is a fire in the building, my immediate reactive response is I need to call 911, the fire department will come. In our organization, when there is an emergency, call your manager, the manager swoops in, rescues the team or the organization from that emergency. But now if I am a neighborhood or if I am a city and I notice there is a lot of fires happening in one particular area, my pattern detection will tell me this zip code is fire prone. So therefore, it will be better if we put a fire department in the zip code. That way, we can respond to those emergencies much more quickly. What would be an even better response is to look at what is the structure. Why is it that we have so many fires in this particular neighborhood, and what kind of response will prevent these fires from occurring in the first place? That will require some degree of creative exploration and thinking. And you will find in organizations that when we make a release, we have to all have hands on deck, no new releases, code is frozen. We will describe it as a hypercare type of an environment. In other words, when we release products in our company, we deliver it straight to ICU and we feel good about it. Instead of asking ourselves, why do we release products that are inherently buggy and unstable? And what can you do differently to not have that situation in the first place? There is no quick, easy, patented answer or a best practice for that. What is there is the ability to understand the situation more deeply, to look at the structure of this problem and plan for interventions that are long-lasting. That requires the ability within the organization to suspend judgment, hold a dialogue, and then learn from that experience. Because there is no best practice of how you could do it. There are many good practices, and there are some areas where you'll have to see if it works out and then try something else. In other words, do a trial or do an experiment to understand whether you actually get what is happening in the organization first before you try to plan for an intervention. What I want to do in this particular section is to talk about three techniques, three of many, because the field of thinking in systems is vast. The practitioners transcend not just organizational dynamics, but all sorts of other areas. Here, I'm sharing three techniques that I have used for good purposes, and know that there is a lot more. Yeah? The first one is called containers and exchanges. A container is something that holds a boundary for a system, and an exchange is an interaction or a relationship between two different containers. So, for example, in this particular case, what you're looking at is a product owner who is very busy. If you, as Bob shared today in the morning, if you follow the leader with the curiosity to understand their world of work, you will learn a lot more. So here, what you find in this particular situation, that product owner does not have time to attend planning or review or other team meetings. What is happening in this particular case is that we are seeing that the product owner over a period of time, and it was easy to do because we could look at their calendar, look at the evidence that was left behind by the organizational system for this agent. What we could see is that they have a lot of meetings, and they are providing updates and reports to a lot of committees, mostly similar information, but it has to be formatted differently for the different parties who are interested in that information. And the structure, at least one sliver that was obvious, is that we are trying to apply Agile in a traditional project management office. So let's look at what kind of responses could be. If I am reactive in this situation, the product owner would say, you know, I'll do my best to attend as many meetings as I possibly can, because that is responding to the system as it exists without trying to challenge the status quo. The second option is for us to say, let's adjust our sprint schedule, look at all the other calendars that the product owner has to find the slot and book it for 12 months. This way, that time window cannot be taken by somebody else. So there is some degree of initial frustrations because some meetings will have to be adjusted. But the hope is that in the long run, we will have this product owner able to support this team. What it is not resilient to is when this product owner moves on to something else and a new person comes in, we now are back at the same place. where the product owner is not attending and they don't understand what's going on. So a more creative response could be enabled if you ask a better question. How to be enabled true product ownership in our system, in our organization, for our circumstance, for our case? The response that this organization came with is, first, they recognize that we are a IT PMO. We're not going to boil the ocean and change a big company all at once. So in order to make a person be effective as a product owner, we are going to partner them with someone from the project management group so they can take care of all the other supporting interface needs, so the product owner can focus on working with the team on building a great product. This is a very creative response, primarily because you will not find it in any best practice book. You see? Yes, sir. Yes. Correct. Right. Right.
We never actually interjected ourselves in
Correct.
activities of agile or agile transformation.
Correct.
Okay, that's kind of setting up for a disaster.
Sure. Right.
That's where the agile practices are driven. And the PMO takes care of what exactly we need.
Yes. Sir, what's your name? Ajay. Could we kind of pause the questions until the end? I'm hoping to kind of leave enough space. And yes, there could be one instance in an organization where IT and PMO, they are totally different. And you will find that in companies that are not purely software oriented. So if you are a bank, if you are an insurance company whose primary product or service is not software, you're going to find a program management office or a business project management office. You'll also find the IT counterpart for it. So it might be a subunit of the larger PMO. The core point in this particular story is that the organization understands the work that the people do through a set of dashboards, some set of information, primarily geared around budget, scope, and timeline, which is the primary governance mechanisms. So when you have a team that is building products incrementally, there is going to be some degree of disconnect. The reason they partnered with a PMO is so we could free up the product owner to truly be a good or a real product owner, as opposed to being a translator. This was that particular situation. The second technique that I want to talk about is to pay attention to how stocks and flows or backlogs operate. If you have been part of a travel itinerary going from Austin to, let's say, Vegas, and you're taking an airplane, you're going to experience at least three different lines, three different queues. The first line will be to get your bags checked in. Then there will be the second line to go through the security processing. And the third line will be to get on the plane and get a seat. What all airlines will tell you is show up at least 90 minutes before your flight boarding time. The reason they say that, even though you know that going through and checking the actual act of turning in your bags probably takes 3 minutes, the actual act of processing through the security takes about 5 minutes. The line in the boarding is a bit longer, but when I get inside the plane, getting my seat and placing my bags on the overhead compartment, it takes about another 5 minutes. So the actual value-added time where you are receiving some benefit is probably about 10 to 15 minutes, but we need enough buffer, because what we don't know is how many people will be standing in the line in front of you. The second option is when I have backlogs that are parallel. I have multiple teams or efforts going on in the same time, with different teams pulling from different backlogs. What you will also find is your product ends up like a Swiss cheese. There is some work done by all the teams. Everyone has been busy. They have their story points to report on, but we don't have anything end to end to release to our customers. Because when I have my backlogs that are parallelized, prioritization goes off the window. It is no different than someone cutting in line in front of you in front of a grocery store. You see? So one of the things that you could do in your organization to understand the system is to map all the different backlogs and how they connect with each other. In this particular example, you're looking at an event that drove this activity because stakeholders were tired of waiting on a particular request. And when they could find out, they would not know where it is at. So there's a lot of lack of transparency at a systemic level. It's not that agents in the organization are actively trying to hide information, but the fact that there are so many different backlogs, the fact that there is items added to all of these different backlogs, a stakeholder doesn't know, where am I at? When will my item get done? To analyze this, we looked at where do you keep it? How do you exchange the information? And then finally, we looked at which of these queues are aggregator queues. In other words, 5 or 6 people make their list, they give it to somebody else who aggregates into a master list. Then that list is provided to another person and so on. So those are aggregator lists. And then there are generator lists, which generate new items for other people. Now, in this particular situation, if we look at this dynamic, a event-based response is, the product owner schedules enough meetings, tries to stay ahead of all the stakeholder needs in order to understand what items are coming and where they are at. An adaptive response could be to say, let's plan something called as a big room planning. We'll get a room this size, all the stakeholders in the same place, and then we will figure out what items you're going to work on. A creative response will only stem or start after you ask an interesting question. The interesting question that this group in this organization asked is, where do ideas go to die? Or if this looks complex, what might make it simpler? Those were 2 competing questions over here. Here, the response to this situation was to ask ourselves, what do we mean by a product? What is our product? What do customers think our product is? And to agree on that product definition first, before trying to understand how many product backlogs, let me put in quotes, how many product backlogs I need to have. So the intention was to get closer and closer to fewer backlogs. If there was a quick tip that I could provide you in terms of scaling Agile in your organization, look at how many backlogs exist in the organization today. Then whatever you do, immaterial. At the end of it, do you have fewer backlogs or the same or more? If you have fewer, you have scaled effectively. If you end up with more backlogs, then you've been hoodwinked. The third technique, which is a quite popular technique in thinking in systems and what systems thinker will often engage in, is causal loop diagrams. This is an archetype, a very common pattern or a set of interactions that you see. This is described as the fixes that fail archetype, where when there is a problem, you try to attempt a quick fix to the problem. That quick fix alleviates a little bit of the problem, but that quick fix then brings back, after some time delay, unintended consequences that make the problem even worse than it was before. So when a group of people can't figure out how to collaborate, they get into big room planning, and then 3 months later, they find out nothing was shipped. So here, what you're looking at is another organization going through a causal loop diagram. And the purpose of this diagramming was not to build the best an analytical model. The purpose was to see the organization as a whole on one aspect, with all the people looking at the same picture, so we can have a dialogue. We can converse about how the organization behaves in a dynamic sense. Oh, when we do this, it has an effect over here, and the people in that conversation can have an understanding of what the impact is for one group of people taking an action on one side and how it affects the other group on the other side. This is a quite common situation. Organizations decide we want to become agile, so we'll send everybody into a 2-day training. That is an event-based response, because the interpretation of this challenge is that people don't know, and if I fix the gap by providing more knowledge, then everyone will be agile. That's a very common expectation, but the unintended consequences of that is training or knowledge evaporates if you don't apply it, and now you have people in name only trained, but they don't yet know how to act or behave. The second option is to say, you know, Agile is proven to be successful, so we're going to launch a whole bunch of teams, maybe 90 teams, Emmy. And we start a whole bunch of teams, and then hopefully that will aggregate into some sense of organizational agility. A more creative response could be to say, you know, as leaders, let's join into the conversation, understand why the organization is the way it is today, and then learn to engage with the organization as it goes through that transformation. That's a much difficult ask for people who are prone to jumping to conclusions, who only respond to event in a reflex manner. They find it extremely difficult because partly at some level, the values of the individual and the values, in other words, what you will find is if the purpose of your organization is to be adaptive, and that's what you all want to be, Agile is a fantastic fit. But if you want to build a secret service organization and you're trying to do Agile, it's not going to work out because the larger organization has a totally different goal than the type of system that you are taking in. The story of the elephant and 7 blind men is a fantastic story. Here are 7 blind people, experts, judges. They come across a big elephant and they only get to see what they interact with. So one person says it's like a pillar. No, the other says it's a snake. Because not everyone gets to see the whole, they don't understand that it is totally different than their local interpretation of that particular animal or that particular situation. Nothing is possible without faith, not even mathematics. In mathematics, at a foundational level, there are some axioms that we just take it. Because if we don't take that leap of faith, you'll not be able to do anything. A very common axiom is 2 parallel lines never intersect. It cannot be empirically proven or disproven. How long do you draw the line? But if I take that leap of faith, now I can build bridges, I can build buildings, I can make some engineering calculations because it helps me to achieve some outcome. Similarly, for us as people, we have some elements of beliefs or faith that we assume to be true, and we then operate based on those elements of faith. This may or may not be known to you explicitly, but if you pay attention to your own thinking processes, slowly it will reveal what your real beliefs are. Now, one of the things that you could look for is where do you have an emotional response? In other words, whenever a new piece of information is presented to you, how do you respond? Do you get uncomfortable in the chair? Do you want to I have some? That emotional reflex is the first indicator that you are experiencing some degree of confirmation bias. Now, if it is not life-threatening, my recommendation is to breathe. Because if you allow yourself the time to not jump to conclusions, then you may have the opportunity to look at other information in that dynamic and consider it. I'm not saying change your faith or change your belief systems, but suspend it at least temporarily to see what other pieces of information is also true before you form an opinion. In her essay, Donella Meadows talks about leverage points in a system. The easiest and the most accessible point of leverage in any system is changing measures, parameters, or some numbers. In other words, if you were to say, I want to get healthy, the easiest thing to do is to say, I'll have a 2,000 calorie limit in my food. I've set a target, now I'm going to measure myself towards that target. If you want to be agile, we will deliver 5 new releases this year. So much easier to do because numbers are easier to manipulate. What is harder, and it is difficult, especially in a bureaucracy, is to face the consequences of your decisions, which is at a much higher level when we talk about points of leverage, which is somewhere over here, the strength of feedback loops or negative feedback loops. And if you were to look at Agile, at all levels, it tries to deliver a small dose of pain. Remember the oohs when we had at the start on the keynote? We deliver small doses of pain because that pain is your best learning buddy. For that, first and foremost, you'll need to have some degree of sensitivity to it. That sensitivity can be built through empathy for someone else's pain, but at minimum, when you encounter that small degree of pain, use that information to understand what your values are, what your beliefs are, and can I suspend it temporarily to learn something new? Because if you let it go, then you build pain tolerance and you don't learn and grow. You just get used to it, you see? Now, what happens in organizations is all of these challenges, they get perceived by people in different ways, which is why building an empathy around other people's experiences, giving legitimacy that what you experience is true, but what I also experience is also true. So maybe there is something more to the situation than our local experiences or local interpretations of what's going on. That is the primary requisite if you want to see the whole of the problem and not just a part of it. It's more like a dance floor. You see, in any organization, you're working with people who have their own backgrounds, their own histories, their own biases, their own preferences. You're also working with teams who have their own mission, processes, how we do stuff. And you're working inside an organization which has its own history, subsystems, the larger organizational culture, the stakeholders, and etc. It will be impossible for you to take some time to understand the whole before you actually do something. So prepare to dance, you see? And this is why it is extremely important to not assume that my experience is the only experience and everyone else also has the same experience as I do, because then you're dancing alone. I'll leave with a small tip. As you work in organizations, don't worry too much about whether we are doing sprint planning correctly or we are doing this agile practice correctly or incorrectly, because that path will lead to dictating a series of actions. On the other hand, if you focus on our people experiencing a positive outcome when they are participating in a team-based work environment, if those experiences are something that people actually value and they enjoy it, they will alter their belief systems. They'll say, yeah, prioritization, we could do prioritization because last time I did it with my peers, it was challenging, but we got through it in a manner that was taking my things into account. This means I've had a better experience planning, therefore, I will have more ideas about how we could plan differently next time. But if I come in with a series of do this, 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 and this, and the experience is negative for people, they're not going to change their belief systems. You see, a lot of us are caught up in routines. We do things out of habit. We do things how we've always done them. And what learning requires is building that awareness about what else could be true, being able to frame and reframe a situation from multiple vantage points, and allowing for emergence of a new direction. If you already know how exactly the change is going to turn out, then you are wrong. And You see? So you have to allow for new information to come in because this is something that you are experiencing as an organization together. I think all I wanted to say was the state that we find the Agile community in today is primarily driven by the kind of questions we've asked along the way. And if we want to change in our Agile community about how we solve for the problems that we really have and how we deliver on the promises that we said Agile will solve for, we have to ask better questions. It is not about the right answer. It is more about the kind of questions you ask, because if you don't ask the right questions, you will end up in the wrong place. It's a bit about me and everybody else. What I want to share with you all that the time is up at 12. So I will not compete with lunch. However, if you want to, I'm here to take any questions or have any conversation that you are interested in.
All right, thank you. And just a couple housekeeping things before we head out to lunch. There are session survey QR codes all around the room. Take out your phone, take a picture if you like this. Along that same line on the back of your badge, there's also QR codes for the Agile conference. And right above that, a QR code for the schedule. Right now is lunch for about an hour, and then we'll break for our third set of breakouts. All right, thanks everyone.